Now, there are reports of further intense fighting between Afghan government forces and the Taliban as the militants continue their assaults on two provincial capitals, Herat in the west and Lashkargah in the south. In Herat, a key city near the western border with Iran, government officials say they repelled several Taliban attacks overnight on security checkpoints. A police commander and two of his bodyguards were killed in the fighting. In Lashkargah, the capital of Helmand province, government forces are trying to expel Taliban fighters who now control large swathes of the city. Local people say dead bodies are lying in the streets and inside houses. Food and water is scarce and medical supplies are running low. The UN says it's deeply concerned about the safety of tens of thousands of civilians there. Well, the former US commander for Afghanistan, General David Petraeus, has been speaking to the BBC about his fears about what will happen if the Taliban manage to take Afghanistan's major cities.
Certainly, there will be hundreds of thousands, if not millions, of refugees flooding into countries that can least afford to handle them, such as Pakistan. Beyond that, we'll see al-Qaeda reestablish a sanctuary there. It won't threaten the U.S. homeland or probably even our NATO allies just yet, but it will try. We could see the Islamic State establishing a sanctuary there as well.
That was General David Petraeus there. Well, Jonathan Schroden is an analyst who has been deployed in Afghanistan for the US military for years. Now he directs the Countering Threats and Challenges program at the US Research and Analysis Organization, CNA. Thank you very much, Jonathan, for joining us here on the program. Just listening to the concerns of General Petraeus there, who was the US commander. You've served in the country. When you look at the unfolding situation currently in Afghanistan, what do you think?
Well, it's certainly troubling, the advances that we've seen the Taliban make in the wake of the U.S., the beginning of the U.S. withdrawal. There's no doubt that it's taken a lot of people by surprise, especially the Taliban's push in the north, some of the areas that have traditionally been more aligned with the government. And so it's definitely a troubling situation. But I've been maintaining for several months, as the Taliban offensive has unfolded, that while they are making, they've made a lot of sort of easy gains in rural areas, that when it came to try to capture the cities, that they would find it a much different proposition. You need a lot more fighters, you need a lot more weaponry, et cetera, to try and take these heavily populated areas. And I think you're seeing that right now. The Taliban have kind of run into a much, much stronger resistance in areas like Kandahar, Herat, Lashkargah, and they're taking pretty heavy casualties in trying to seize those particular cities.
Do you think the Taliban themselves were surprised? Because I suppose they're trying their luck, aren't they, to see if they can then make a push for Kabul?
Yeah, I mean, it's not surprising that the Taliban, again, with the U.S. taking its thumb off the scale in Afghanistan by withdrawing its military forces, that the Taliban would try to press their luck and see how they could do militarily, see just how far they could get. And I think they'll continue to do that, at least for the foreseeable future. It'll be incumbent on Afghanistan's government and its security forces to repel these Taliban offensives, especially against the cities, and to try and establish some type of new stalemate where both sides recognize that they can't win militarily in order to then try to rejuvenate the peace talk process in Doha.
Do you have faith in the Afghan forces and the Afghan National Army? Because we've been speaking to Afghan generals here on the program who have been putting on a very defiant, confident front. But do you think that they're able to push back in the way that they should if they want to repel the Taliban?
Well, I do think they have certain advantages when it comes to trying to defend Afghanistan's major cities and the heavily populated areas. Again, because to take those cities, the Taliban will need to mass fighters and mass equipment and material, weapons and materiel to try and do that. That then makes them vulnerable to airstrikes and air attacks from the likes of the Afghan Air Force. And the Taliban have virtually no defenses against attacks from the air. So as long as the Afghan security forces can keep the Afghan Air Force flying, that will give them a marked advantage against the Taliban in their attempts, in the Taliban's attempts to try and take these more heavily populated areas.
Do you think that's possible? Because right now they're relying on Zoom calls with their American counterparts to see, how they should actually do an operation. I mean, is that sustainable in the long run during a war at this scale and pace?
Well, I think the situation that we're in right now is certainly one of flux, right? A lot of the contractors that were present in Kabul that were operating U.S. contractors have had to leave. along with the U.S. withdrawal. And so they're still trying to figure out exactly how they're going to do maintenance for these Afghan aircraft, whether that's the Afghan government could get its own contracts in place. They could take the aircraft to other countries nearby to try and do maintenance there. As you said, they're trying to do some amount of advising virtually. And it's clear they haven't figured that all out yet. But I think, 6 months from now, one has to believe that the U.S. and the Afghan government together will have figured out how to get into some sort of steady state rhythm on this. And the U.S. has also dedicated more aircraft, right? They promised the delivery of 37 more Blackhawks to Afghanistan. And if they continue to do that, they can continue to bolster the number of aircraft that the Air Force has there at any given time.
You talked about the element of surprise, or I suppose in many ways the Afghan forces as well as the international community being caught by surprise at the way in which the Taliban have been able to make this kind of push. There is a real strategy here, though, isn't there? I mean, first we saw them take the border crossings and then go after the districts and then the major cities. There's clearly a strategy that they really thought about. Is this something the Taliban are capable of doing on their own?
Oh, I mean, if you're implying, are they getting help from external sources? I don't think there's any question that they've gotten help from various members of the Pakistani security establishment, and they have for years. I mean, it used to be an open secret. It's no longer even a secret. But that said, if you look at the three modern insurgencies that have taken place in Afghanistan's recent past, the Mujahideen victory over the Soviets, the Taliban takeover of the country, and then the Taliban resurgence in the mid-2000s, they all employed roughly a similar strategy where they started in rural areas and used them to then encroach upon and choke the cities. And so the Taliban are largely following that same strategy that has worked 3 times within the last 40 years. So it's not too surprising that they're using the strategy that they're using.
Jonathan Schroden, thank you so much for your analysis and sharing your thoughts here on the program.
Thank you for having me.